He won the most famous individual trophy in college football. He became one of the greatest wide receivers the NFL has ever seen. He played 17 seasons, caught more passes than almost anyone in league history, and made 9 Pro Bowls. He is still, to this day, his franchise's all-time leader in nearly every meaningful receiving category. And when his career finally ended, he had 0 championship rings. Not one. For a talent this rare, that should not have been possible. So, how did it happen? How does a player this good spend an entire career chasing something he almost never even got the chance to touch? His name is Tim Brown. And this is the story of a career that deserved so much more than the single shot it ever got. Before he was a Raider, before he was a Heisman winner, Tim Brown was just a kid from Dallas, Texas, who didn't even start playing organized football until his sophomore year of high school. At Woodrow Wilson High School, he was already one of the fastest athletes in the entire state, good enough to compete at an elite level in the 400-meter dash and the long jump. That raw speed translated onto a football field almost instantly, and by the time he graduated, every major program in the country wanted him. Oklahoma wanted him. Nebraska wanted him. SMU wanted him. He picked Notre Dame instead, and the Fighting Irish had no idea what they were about to get. Lined up as a flanker, he wasn't just a pass catcher. He ran the ball out of the backfield, returned kickoffs, and returned punts, doing damage in every single phase of the game. As a freshman, Brown set the Notre Dame receiving record with 28 catches. As a sophomore, he added 397 more yards and started flashing the return skills that would define his whole career. By his junior year, he was averaging 176 yards of total offense per game, third best in the entire country, and Notre Dame fans were already calling him Touchdown Timmy. But it was his senior season that turned him into a legend. Against Michigan State, in front of a rare primetime college football audience, Brown returned back-to-back punts for touchdowns, one for 66 yards, the next for 71. It was the kind of highlight that stops a room. And it was the moment Heisman voters stopped debating and started counting ballots. On December 6, 1987, Tim Brown was named the winner of the Heisman Trophy, beating Syracuse quarterback Don McPherson by a landslide margin. He became the first wide receiver in the history of the award to win it. Not a running back, not a quarterback, a receiver and return man from a Notre Dame team that had gone a modest 25-21 during his 4 years there. He finished his college career as Notre Dame's all-time leader in receiving yards, with 2,493, a record that stood for years after he left campus. Brown didn't need a great team to be the best player in the country. That should have been the first warning sign of everything that was coming. In 1988, the Los Angeles Raiders selected Tim Brown with the 6th overall pick. It felt like destiny. The Raiders were the league's most legendary outlaw franchise, and Brown was the most electrifying playmaker in the draft. As a rookie, he set an NFL record for combined net yards and led the league in kickoff returns, racking up over 1,000 yards just bringing the ball out of his own end zone. It was a sign of things to come. By the time his career was over, Brown would become the only player in Raiders history to score points 4 completely different ways: on a pass reception, on a rush, on a kickoff return, and on a punt return. He wasn't just a receiver, he was a walking highlight reel in every phase of the game. But then, in the very first game of his second season, disaster struck. Brown suffered a knee injury that wiped out his entire sophomore year. For a franchise built on speed and explosion, losing its most explosive weapon before he even turned 24 was a gut punch. And it meant that when the Raiders finally made a run at the top of the AFC, Tim Brown wasn't even the centerpiece yet. In 1990, the Los Angeles Raiders went 12-4, the best record in the conference, and stormed into the AFC Championship game behind a talented veteran roster built around stars like Bo Jackson and Marcus Allen. Brown was still working his way back from injury, playing a limited role, not even starting most weeks. He watched from the sideline as the Buffalo Bills demolished his team 51-3, one of the most lopsided losses in conference championship history. It was brutal, but it also planted a seed of a bitter truth that would follow Brown for the next decade. The best team of his career, the one with the deepest roster and the clearest shot at a title, came and went before he was even the guy. By 1993, that had completely changed. Brown exploded into one of the most feared receivers in football, catching 80 passes for 1,180 yards and 7 touchdowns, punishing defenses as both a receiver and a punt returner. The Raiders made the playoffs, crushed the Denver Broncos in the wildcard round, and pushed the Buffalo Bills to the wire in the divisional round before falling just short, 29-23. It was close, it was promising, and then it all went dark. Brown followed that breakout with back-to-back 89-catch seasons in 1994 and 1995, then a 90-catch season in 1996, never once easing off, even as the team around him kept sliding backward. For the next 6 seasons, from 1994 through 1999, the Oakland Raiders did not make the playoffs a single time, not once. 6 full years of Tim Brown playing at an MVP level for a franchise that couldn't get out of its own way. Those years were not just quietly disappointing. They were embarrassing. In 1995, the Raiders raced out to an 8-2 start before completely collapsing, losing their final 6 games and finishing dead last in their division for the first time since 1962. Head coaches came and went, rosters were gutted and rebuilt, and through every single bit of it, Tim Brown kept showing up, kept getting open, and kept putting up numbers that belonged on a playoff team, for a franchise that had forgotten how to be one. Here is what makes that stretch so painful to look back on. While the Raiders were losing, Tim Brown was putting together one of the most quietly dominant runs any receiver has ever had. Starting in 1993, he strung together 9 consecutive 1,000-yard receiving seasons. He caught at least 75 passes for 10 straight years, an NFL record for consistency that still stands today. In 1997, his best individual season, he caught 104 passes for 1,408 yards to lead the entire NFL in receptions, becoming the franchise's all-time leading receiver in the process. Somewhere in the middle of that run, he strung together 176 consecutive starts, an NFL record for a wide receiver that stood as a testament to just how much the Raiders leaned on him, year after year, regardless of who else was on the roster. Teammates and fans started calling him Mr. Raider, and it wasn't just a nickname, it was a job description. He was doing all of this without a stable quarterback, without a true number 2 receiver drawing coverage away from him, and without a team that gave him any real chance to compete for anything. He once said that when people looked at the talented rosters the Raiders had early in his career, the real question wasn't why they only made 1 AFC title game, it was why that roster never won 2 Super Bowls. Instead, Brown spent his prime years as the best player on teams that simply weren't good enough around him. Then, in 1998, everything started to change. The Raiders hired a young, fiery head coach named Jon Gruden, and slowly, painfully, the franchise began to rebuild itself into a contender again. By 2000, Oakland finished 12-4, won the AFC West, and returned to the playoffs for the first time since Brown's breakout season 7 years earlier. They opened the postseason by absolutely dismantling the Miami Dolphins 27-0 in the divisional round, one of the most complete playoff performances the franchise had produced in years. Tim Brown, now in his 30s, was finally back on the biggest stage of his career, 1 win away from the Super Bowl, and once again, the moment slipped away. The Baltimore Ravens shut the Raiders down in the AFC Championship game, winning 16-3, on their way to a Super Bowl title of their own. Brown had waited a decade for another shot. And once again, someone else walked away with the ring. Along the way, Brown kept rewriting the record book in ways that had nothing to do with winning. In December of 2001, at 35 years old, he returned a punt, 88 yards for a touchdown against the Kansas City Chiefs, making him the oldest player in NFL history to ever score on a punt return. He was setting records most players half his age couldn't touch, on a team that was finally, after a decade of losing, starting to look dangerous again. That same month brought heartbreak of a different kind. In January of 2002, the Raiders traveled to New England to face a young, unproven quarterback named Tom Brady in a driving snowstorm. Oakland led late in the 4th quarter when cornerback Charles Woodson appeared to strip the ball from Brady, a fumble that should have sealed the win. Instead, referees applied an obscure rule that overturned the call, ruling it an incomplete pass instead of a fumble. The Patriots tied the game, won it in overtime, and went on to win the franchise's first Super Bowl. It became known simply as the Tuck Rule game, one of the most controversial plays in NFL history. For Tim Brown, it was yet another door slammed shut, this time by a rule most fans had never even heard of before that night. That offseason, Jon Gruden, the coach who had rebuilt the Raiders into contenders, was traded to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in one of the strangest coaching moves in league history. Nobody in Oakland could have known just how much that trade was about to cost them. In 2002, with Bill Callahan now in charge, and quarterback Rich Gannon playing the best football of his life, the Raiders finally put it all together. Gannon won league MVP. Oakland fielded the #1 offense in football. Brown, now 36, passed Gene Upshaw that season to become the franchise's all-time leader in games played, and he was catching passes alongside a future first-ballot Hall of Famer in Jerry Rice, who had joined the Raiders as a free agent the year before. Two of the greatest wide receivers the game has ever produced, sharing the same huddle in the same offense at the same time. The Raiders demolished the New York Jets 30-10 in the wild-card round, then blew out the Tennessee Titans 41-14 in the divisional round. For the first time in Tim Brown's 15-year career, the Oakland Raiders were headed to the Super Bowl. He had waited his entire adult life for this exact moment, and it was finally here. Then came the wreckage. 2 days before the biggest game of Tim Brown's life, the team's best offensive lineman, center Barrett Robbins, vanished from the team hotel and turned up across the border in a state that ruled him out of the game entirely. It was a stunning, chaotic distraction in the final hours before the biggest game any of them would ever play. And the chaos was only beginning. Standing on the opposite sideline in Super Bowl XXXVII was John Gruden, the very coach who had built this Raiders roster from the ground up and knew every single one of their plays, their audibles, their tendencies, before the game had even kicked off. Reports later described Gruden playing the role of Rich Gannon in Tampa Bay's practices all week, mimicking his mannerisms so precisely that his own defense could read the offense before the ball was even snapped. Every audible Gannon called at the line. Tampa Bay's defenders had already heard a version of it in practice, days earlier, from the mouth of the coach who once called those same plays for the Raiders. That season, Gannon's top 2 targets had been Rice, with 1,211 yards and 7 touchdowns, and Brown, with 930 yards and 2 touchdowns of his own. 2 legends, carrying an offense all the way to the league's biggest stage. It didn't matter. What followed was one of the most lopsided beatings in Super Bowl history. Rich Gannon threw 5 interceptions, a Super Bowl record, 3 of them returned for touchdowns. Tampa Bay built a 34-3 lead and cruised to a 48-21 win. Jerry Rice actually found the end zone in the loss, scoring a touchdown of his own. But Tim Brown, the receiver who had waited 15 years for this exact stage, finished the biggest game of his career with 1 single catch for 9 yards. Brown later explained that the offensive plan Oakland had spent the entire week preparing, one built around pounding the ball on the ground behind a massive offensive line, was scrapped without warning just days before kickoff. The offense that had carried them all season long was suddenly unrecognizable on the sport's biggest stage. He has never fully let go of how that Super Bowl slipped away. It was the only Super Bowl Tim Brown ever played in. 17 seasons, 1 appearance, 1 catch, 0 rings. The fall afterward was fast and unforgiving. In 2003, the Raiders collapsed to just 4 wins. Brown, now in his late 30s, still managed 52 catches and 2 touchdowns, but his role kept shrinking week by week. In 2004, the team released him outright, ending 16 years with the only NFL franchise he had ever known. Weeks later, in a twist nobody saw coming, he signed with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, reuniting with the very coach who had orchestrated his most painful defeat. He played 1 final season under John Gruden, catching 24 passes for 200 yards and a single touchdown in limited action, before calling it a career. There was something almost poetic about it. The receiver whose Super Bowl dream was shattered by Gruden's genius, ending his playing days on Gruden's own roster. Then, in 2005, in one of the most quietly emotional moments of his life, Tim Brown signed a symbolic 1-day contract with the Oakland Raiders, allowing him to officially retire wearing the only uniform that had ever truly felt like home. When he walked away from football, the numbers were staggering. 1,094 career receptions, 14,934 receiving yards, the second highest total in NFL history at the time, 100 touchdown catches, 9 Pro Bowl selections, a member of the NFL's all-decade team of the 1990s, the all-time leading receiver in Oakland Raiders history, a record he still holds today, almost all of it built during years when his own team could barely finish above 500. By almost any measure, Tim Brown belonged in the Hall of Fame the moment he became eligible. Instead, he waited and waited. Brown became eligible for the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 2010, the The same year, Jerry Rice, arguably the greatest receiver who ever lived, sailed in on the very first ballot. Brown was named a finalist that year too. He did not get in. He was a finalist again in 2011, passed over. Again in 2012, passed over. In 2013, fellow receiver Chris Carter got the call instead. In 2014, it was Andre Reed. Year after year, Tim Brown sat in that room, watched other names get read, and walked out with nothing, wondering if the wait would ever end. At the time, only Jerry Rice had more career receiving yards than him in the entire history of the league, and still, the door kept staying shut. It took 6 long years and 6 separate finalist appearances before the Hall of Fame finally opened its doors to him in 2015. But here is the part that turns this story from frustrating into truly heartbreaking. During those 6 years of waiting, Tim Brown lost people who mattered most to him. His own father passed away before that phone call ever came. His close friend and former teammate Chester McGlockton passed away too. So did Al Davis, the legendary Raiders owner who had drafted him back in 1988 and believed in him from the very beginning. None of them got to see Tim Brown walk across that stage in Canton, Ohio. When he finally got the news, Brown admitted it was bittersweet in the truest sense of the word, a joy that could never be fully complete, because the people who deserved to celebrate it with him most were no longer there to see it. He still went to Canton that summer and gave one of the longest, most heartfelt enshrinement speeches of his class. A 17-year career and an 11-year wait finally getting the send-off it had always deserved, even if it came far later than it should have. So think about the shape of this entire career. A Heisman Trophy won on pure talent, from a college team that barely had a winning record. 17 NFL seasons of historic, record-breaking production, much of it wasted on rosters that couldn't get out of their own way. Not one, but 3 separate near misses at a championship, an AFC title blowout in his early 20s, another AFC title shutout in his mid-30s, and a controversial overtime loss decided by a rule almost nobody outside a referee's handbook had ever heard of. And then, when the Super Bowl finally arrived, right at the tail end of his career, it arrived wrapped in chaos. A missing lineman, a former coach who knew every secret, and a beating so total it barely resembled football. Compare that to the players who did win multiple rings during that same stretch of NFL history. Most of them played on genuinely stacked rosters, with front offices that built around them for years at a time. Tim Brown spent the majority of his prime carrying teams that had no business being taken seriously, and he did it anyway, season after season, without ever complaining his way out of Oakland. He gave the NFL nearly 2 decades of greatness. He gave Notre Dame a Heisman Trophy that changed the way the world saw wide receivers forever. He gave the Oakland Raiders records that still stand more than 2 decades after he retired. The only thing football never gave him back was the one thing every great player is supposed to get a fair shot at chasing: a championship of his own. Not because he wasn't good enough, not because he didn't work for it, because time, circumstance, and one impossible Super Bowl matchup conspired against him at nearly every turn of his career. Tim Brown didn't just deserve one Super Bowl. Watching his entire career unfold, from that Heisman night in 1987 to that quiet, symbolic contract signing in 2005, it is hard not to believe he deserved several. He just never got the team, or the timing, to prove it. And that, more than any trophy or any record, might be the truest measure of just how great Tim Brown really was.